My friend Paul Seegert joins us now. Paul is managing partner of PCS Advisors. They are a healthcare advisory group. Welcome, Paul. How are you? It's good to talk to you again, my friend.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So this story is pretty concerning. There's two angles on this, right? I've heard some people say this could be attributed to actual excess vaccine deaths as well, because there are interesting things that happen when there are negative reactions to the vaccine that can look like other types of health problems. It could be, maybe it's a combination of both. I doubt it's one or the other. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think we know, but I think we need to look into it and find out. You've got, if you try and figure out, okay, how long has it been since we've had an uptick in deaths of this magnitude? And actually, life insurers, which is where this is coming from, their losses are a great source of data on this. They have to get this stuff right or they lose billions of dollars. They haven't gotten it this wrong since 1918. And
wow,
this is way worse than that.
Wait. 1918, is that the same time we had the Spanish flu?
Right, exactly.
So that's interesting.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
No, exactly right. And it would be considered a once in 200 year catastrophe for their business model if they were to get it wrong by 10%. They are extremely they're scarily accurate at being able to predict when people are going to die.
Yeah.
And the uptick was 40%. And that 40% that I'm talking about is amongst people that are 18 to 64 working people. We're not talking about the elderly that were picked off by COVID that had 4 comorbidities and were 78 years old. We're talking about 18 to 64-year-old working Americans. And when they looked at the causes of death, for lots of those subset age groups, it was 50-50 COVID. And then the thing to me that's the most interesting and alarming is the other 50% that were non-COVID.
That in that age group, that has to be at least partially, potentially unreported, unregistered, or uncounted negative reactions to the vaccine, because that's way too big of a number to just be in that age group. Say, I didn't go in for my checkup. And that age group is not typically when you're finding cancer or heart disease or diabetes. So there has to be a couple of elements to that age group. Wouldn't you think? Wouldn't that be logical?
Well, it would be logical that we should investigate it, and people shouldn't be in fear of getting canceled to look into that.
Yes,
we should leave no stone unturned. I mean, that is such an alarming number. It's just incredible, and it's something we've never seen.
Yeah.
So it should absolutely be investigated from every angle. Why did it happen? Why did we have such an uptick of suicide? Why did we have such an uptick of heart-related deaths, all the different forms of heart disease and hypertension and so on? Some of it is misdiagnosis or late diagnosis, or you didn't get in for the care, but that does, as you point out, it can't account for all of it.
Well, and some of it could be negative reactions to the vaccine, but some of it could be post having had COVID, because I'm reading some very alarming articles that are showing that COVID does things to you down the road that you may not be aware of just because you had the virus and got beyond it. Because of and the reason why I bring up the vaccine is the two kind of work similarly. That spike protein does very strange things. And that's something that should be, as you said, looked into very thoroughly. It could be that that's a problem with the vaccine. It could also be that it's a problem with the virus. When anybody gets it, there are potential long-standing effects afterwards. That this is all, like you said, this is very concerning, and I think people should be concerned about this.
Well, it goes back to your intro. I was there. Dr. Marty McCary from, I think, Johns Hopkins did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal not long back, and he was very fired up about the fact that the CDC had withheld data about the outcomes for people with a natural immunity versus vaccination, and they didn't share that information. They wouldn't release it until very recently, within the last few months.
Right.
And they didn't want it to discourage vaccination because we've had this single approach,
right,
which isn't what every scientific person would have agreed to, but we crowded out any other viewpoints. But what it found was that you had, and the reason they didn't share that data prior was that there was very good evidence from New York and California that natural immunity was 2.8 times as effective in preventing hospitalization and 3.3 to 4.7 times as effective in preventing COVID infection compared with vaccination. Wow. So somehow that was still spun to encourage vaccination because, hey, you don't know if you're high risk, even though many of the risk factors are things you would know about. But my whole takeaway from this is, how is it possible that you have such a small number of scientific leaders in this country, like Marty Makary, like Harvey Reich, I think he's at Yale? Well, you have like very few that get into the conversation and aren't scared to get into the conversation with, it isn't even necessarily a dissenting view, but to say, hey, should we also look at this?
Yeah.
Because this has become so based on political science. It's crazy.
Yeah, this is, and we're talking with Paul Seegert, PCS Advisors. This is very reminiscent of the Middle Ages, and when scientists began to start making discoveries that were enormous in terms of our place in the universe. And, you know, the church and the government combined decided that that was heresy and burned people at the stake for even considering such ideas, that the earth wasn't the center of the universe, but rather, you know, rotated around the sun and not the other way around. So, it's kind of scary when you have a guy on national TV saying, I am the science, and if you challenge me, you're challenging science, while at the same time not actually allowing scientists to be involved in conversations like the ones we're talking about right here.
Yeah, it's incredible. And one of the most powerful things I read in that article, that op-ed, was that, you know, the normal course of events would be the data gets released, then NIH steps in and others in the scientific community and say, let's study this. For instance, you know, the talking point that we've heard from those who are leading us through the pandemic about natural immunity is, we can't rely on it, get vaccinated, because we don't know how long it'll last. Mm-hmm. Well, under normal circumstances, NIH would have done studies on that and evaluated it, but instead, CDC didn't release the data, NIH didn't do a study, Johns Hopkins had to do their own, because no one else was doing it, and they had to fight to get the data to justify doing it, the whole basis that natural immunity was effective. And then when they did the study on their own, it proved that 2 years later, 99% of the people had strong protection. And, of course, that's about how long the whole thing's been going on.
Yeah.
So we're still in the midst of all this.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
So let me ask you this: we're talking with Paul Seegert. That brings me to a point I want to have you discuss. Dr. Robert Redfield is a former CDC director, and we know that the CDC is refusing to release a lot of data, some of which is centered around people 18 to 49. That's an age group we're watching very closely for potential negative reactions to the vaccine. It's also centered around boosters, another thing we're very concerned about in terms of how effective are they, and could there be a point at which there's diminishing returns. Here's what Robert Redfield said. Oh, hold on, I got to turn my bite on.
I think the best thing for CDC to do is to tell the American public the truth and let the data there. I'm sure the American public is intelligent enough to understand the explanations. I know there's a concern that they have that the data somehow may be misinterpreted to determine the efficacy of vaccines, rather than just tell people the truth.
And he's on Fox News there. So what I'm hearing you say is that, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, if the CDC doesn't release the data, it doesn't get studied. Therefore, if there's information in the data about the booster shots or about the age group 18 to 49, if it doesn't get released, not only does it not get misinterpreted, it doesn't even get interpreted, right? I mean, there would almost have to...
Yeah, there's truth in that. Okay. I mean, absolutely true. Yeah. How do they study it if they don't have it? I mean, it sparks more investigation. The whole data that they finally did release from California and New York spurred Johns Hopkins to do the research to evaluate to do their own research on the power of natural immunity and the durability of it specifically, since that was the biggest argument for ignoring it or minimizing its power and value. And they determined it was very powerful, very valuable, very strong, and that, of course, doesn't support the narrative. It actually supports all those folks that signed on to the Great Barrington Declaration, which said protect the infirm or most vulnerable and allow others to live their lives normally. And you remember all that stuff about don't make the cure worse than the disease.
Right.
And that conversation that we gave up a long time ago, when you look at these numbers where the death rates are up and these insurers are paying record claims for age groups that, are in that 18 to 64 age group, it really does warrant more investigation.
Yeah.
What did we do that caused all these non-COVID deaths in 40-year-old males and females?
Yeah, there's a lot to take from this. I have 30 seconds. Why do you think we turned away from the Barrington Declaration with this pandemic? I have my own opinion, but what's yours?
Well, all the people that they asked for advice that got to speak publicly, if you go look into it, many of them are paid consultants by the industry that gets paid to sell vaccines. So it's always about the money.
Yeah, it's a great point. All right. Hey, listen, Paul, always good to talk to you. Thanks for being brave enough to speak out about this. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Managing partner, PCS Advisors, a healthcare advisory group, Paul Seegert.